Hey Math Aces, and welcome to Mr. Ace Math. In this lesson, we're going to learn about subtracting decimals. And here is our video breakdown. And just so you know, you can find this video breakdown with timestamps in the description below. Feel free to use it to go to whichever part you need. First, we'll start by going over how to subtract decimals. After that, we'll go over two examples, followed by the pause and practice. This is important because this is where you get the chance to try questions on your own based on what you've learned. After the pause and practice, the answers will be revealed, and finally, we'll have the reflection. And this is just a brief review of everything we've learned from this lesson. But in order to do well in this lesson, you have to make sure that you know the following. Make sure you know how to subtract multi-digit numbers and about decimal place values, tenths, hundredths, thousandths, and so on. So make sure you know those, and let's get started. So first of all, how exactly do we subtract decimals? Well, there are a few steps. The first thing, and the most important thing, is to make sure that you line up the decimal point. Why is that important? Well, that's important because when you line up the decimal point, it helps you line up your place values. Let's say, for example, we have 3.21 minus 1.5. And let's also clear a workspace here. So we'll start by writing 3.21, and then we'll write 1.5. In the number 3.21, by the way, that's properly read as 3 21 hundredths, we have several place values. We've got whole number place values to the left of the decimal point, and we've got decimal place values to the right of the decimal point. First, we have 3, and that is the ones place. Next, we have the value 2, and that's in the tenths place. And finally, we have the number 1, and that is in the hundredths place. In the number 1.5, properly read as 1 5/10, we have the 1, which is in the ones place. And we have the number 5, which is in the tenths place. If we try to just put one number on top of the other, keep in mind that this is our ones place, this is our tenths place, and this is the hundredths place. But the hundredths place in our top number is getting added to the tenths place in our second number, and the tenths place in this top number is just over the decimal point, and the ones places aren't even lined up. This is just a total mess, and it's completely wrong. Why is that? Well, the place values aren't lined up. But if we slide this number over so that our decimal points are lined up, we're good to go. Because as you can see, and as we said before, now the place values are lined up perfectly. Take a look. Our ones place values are lined up, our tenths place values are lined up, and our hundredths place values are lined up. So now that our place values are all lined up, we can finally start our subtraction. But before we even start subtracting, we should make sure that we put our decimal point in our answer. And where does it go? Directly below the decimal points in the question. So our decimal points are here, so we'll put our decimal point in our answer right here. There's also a blank spot here. Whenever you're subtracting decimals, you should fill that blank spot with the number 0. And the mathy phrase for that is annexing a 0. And all that means is putting a 0 to the right of the decimal point as a placeholder. And now that everything is set up so that we have our decimal point in our answer and we don't have any blank spots, now we can finally start subtracting. And we should always start from the right and work our way to the left. 1 minus 0 equals 1. We can't do 2 minus 5, so we're going to have to borrow from this 3, which means the 3 will become a 2, and this 2 will become a 12. 12 minus 5 equals 7. And 2 minus 1 equals 1. Making our final answer 1.71, properly read as 1 71/100. Here's the first example. And let's recap how exactly we subtract decimals. First, we start by lining up the decimal point. Remember, this helps us line up our place values. Step 2 is to bring down the decimal point in our answer. It's so important that you don't forget this step. And number 3 is to annex a 0 or zeros if needed. And we'll know that we need them whenever we see a blank space in our question. So here's the actual example. Let's say we've got 7.9 minus 4.82. I'll start by writing in 7.9, and directly beneath it, we'll write 4.82. But we have to make sure that this decimal point is under this decimal point. So it should look like this. And now that our decimal points are lined up, we can start subtracting. Before we do that though, we should make sure that we bring down the decimal point in our answer. So we'll place the decimal point right here. And we should annex any zeros if we need to. Do we need to annex any zeros here? Yeah, because we see a blank space right here. So we need to make sure that we put a 0. And now we can start subtracting. Can we subtract 0 minus 2? No. So we'll have to borrow from the 9, which means this 9 will become an 8, and this 0 will become a 10. And 10 minus 2 equals 8. 8 minus 8 equals 0. And 7 minus 4 equals 3. Making our final answer 3.08, properly read as 3 8/8. So here's example 2. Let's start by writing 32.7. And next, underneath it, we're going to write 14.051. But we need to make sure that we're lining up the decimal point. So this decimal point here needs to be under our first decimal point, which means it should look just like this. Next, we'll make sure that we bring down the decimal point in our answer. And remember that always goes directly below the decimal points in the question. So we'll end up placing it right here. And finally, we'll annex any zeros that we might need. Do you see any blank spots in our question? Yeah, there are actually 2. One above the 5 and another above the 1. And now that we've completed all of these tasks, we're ready to subtract. We can't subtract 0 minus 1, and we can't borrow from this 0 because it's 0. It can't lend anything because it's nothing. So we're going to have to borrow from this 7. The 7 becomes a 6. And now this becomes a 10. And now that this is a 10, we can borrow from this 10, making it a 9. And now this 0 becomes a 10. So now we can do our subtraction. 10 minus 1 equals 9. 9 minus 5 equals 4. 6 minus 0 equals 6. Can we subtract 2 minus 4? No, we cannot. So, we're going to borrow from this 3. The 3 becomes a 2, and this 2 will become a 12. And 12 minus 4 equals 8. And 2 minus 1 equals 1. Making our final answer 18.649. Properly read as 18 and 649 thousandths. So here's your pause and practice. Just pause and practice. Hit the pause button and try these questions. When you think you're done and all of the answers are correct, hit play to see if you're right. Ready, set, go. So let's take a look at our answers. Number 1 is 4.199, properly read as 4 and 199 thousandths. Number 2, 18.81, properly read as 18 and 81 hundredths. Number 3 is 9.79, properly read as 9 and 79 hundredths. Number 4 is 3.5, properly read as 3 and 5 tenths. Number 5 is 4.7, properly read as 4 and 7 tenths. How'd you do with the first 5? If you got them all right, make sure you share this with a classmate. Number 6 is 1.3, properly read as 1 and 3 tenths. Number 7 is 0.92, properly read as 92 hundredths. Number 8 is 2.771, properly read as 2 and 771 thousandths. Number 9 is 56.6, properly read as 56 and 6 tenths. And number 10 is 14. How'd you do? If you got all 10 of these questions correct, in the comments below, type Pause and Practice Pro. Way to go, Math Aces. So let's reflect on what we've learned today. The main rule for subtracting decimals is to line up the decimal point. The reason for lining up the decimal point is to line up the place values correctly. When you place a 0 in for a place value that has no number, that is called annexing a 0. After you line up the decimals, you must bring down the decimal point and then annex any zeros in any blank spaces you may have. I hope it was helpful, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in math class.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Questions? Comments? Leave them down below.
And thanks for using Mr. Ace Math. Don't just pass math, ace it.